Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Dear friends, hope you are all safe and enjoying study at your place with Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University amidst this pandemic situation. I, Dr. Divya Shah, an Assistant Professor of English at School of Humanities and Social Science at BAOU, welcome you all for today's session. Today in this SYBA English course, we are going to discuss unit number 4, that is Pride and Prejudice, from the paper number 5 entitled as Study of Novel. First we will start with the author's introduction and then we will go to the text. Once we get the idea of the text, we will discuss the text from various perspectives. So first let's start with the Jane Austen. Jane Austen was born in the year 1775 in South Central England and she was the seventh of 8 children. Out of her 7 siblings, Austen was closest to her only sister Cassandra. According to her brother Henry, Jane Austen's life resembles her novel, a series of quiet, unexceptional events. When Austen was 20, she met Tom Lefroy, a young Irishman visiting his uncle in Hampshire, but the two young people couldn't go further as Lefroy's family sent him home rather than letting him attach himself to someone as poor as clergyman's daughter. When she was 27, the wealthy Harris Big Wither proposed her and she accepted. The next morning, however, Austen changed her mind. Giving up the wealth and security inherent in such a match, she rejected him because she did not love him. Although Austen never got married, her most of the novels are centered around the theme of the courtship and marriage. From 1796 to 1798, she wrote her first 3 novels, Northanger Abbey, which was originally titled as Susan, Sense and Sensibility, originally titled as Elinor and Marian, and Pride and Prejudice, which was originally titled as First Impressions. Her most of the early works present the world in which typical middle-class country people lived in 19th century Britain. The family is at the core of the setting and thus the maneuvering that lead to marriage are all important because matrimony supplies stability along with social and economic stability as well. After the death of the father, Jane Austen wrote another novels like Mansfield Park, Emma and Persuasion. She died at very young age in 1817. While writing the incomplete novel Sedition, Austen's work received huge success not just in Europe but also in America during mid-19th century. Her novels defines the era's novel of manners and they became timeless classics that remained critical and popular successes for over 2 centuries after her death. So friends, this was all about Jane Austen. Now let us talk about the text which is centered around Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Catherine and Lydia. The beginning of the novel introduces us with Mrs. Bennet's preoccupation with marrying off her daughters and her self-pitying nature. When Charles Bingley, a rich single man, moves to the Netherfield estate, Mrs. Bennet is excited as she hopes to marry one of her 5 daughters to him. When the Bennet's daughter meet Bingley at a local ball, they are impressed by his outgoing personality and friendly disposition. However, they didn't like much by Bingley's friend Fitzwilliam Darcy, the protagonist of the novel, a land-owning aristocrat who seems proud of his wealth and whom Elizabeth Bennet overhears refusing to dance with her. Bingley and the oldest Bennet daughter, Jane soon form an attachment. However, Bingley's sister Caroline and his best friend Darcy are not happy with this relationship. As the novel progresses, we come to know about Darcy's attention and attraction for Eliza, especially her spirited wit and expressive eyes he finds very attractive. On the other hand, Eliza, who gets attracted toward George Wickham, a handsome officer, Wickham's fine story about Darcy makes Darcy appear not only proud but cruel, and Elizabeth accepts Wickham's account without a single question. She starts disliking Darcy even more because of the account. Mr. Collins got rejected by Elizabeth and gets married to her friend Charlotte Lucas, who wants to marry for security rather than love, one of the major themes of the novel. Amidst all this, Jane receives a letter from Caroline Bingley, who writes to Jane that they do not intend to return, and she predicts a match between Bingley and Darcy's sister Georgiana, who is also at that time in London. Elizabeth visits Charlotte at her new home, and there she meets Darcy's aunt, Lady Catherine. Here, Darcy visits his aunt and he surprises Eliza with his changed behavior. He doesn't talk much but continuously tries to get Eliza's company. One day he proposes Eliza, but believing Darcy is responsible for Bingley's separation from her sister Jane and for Wickham's misfortune, Elizabeth refuses the proposal. The next day, Darcy's letter makes Elizabeth realize that it was her own pride that prejudiced her against Darcy. After returning home, Elizabeth goes on a trip with her aunt and uncle to Derbyshire country, where they visit Darcy's estate also, and here Darcy's behavior indicates that he still loves Elizabeth. She also begins to have similar feelings for him. Once again, news about Lydia's elopement with Wickham causing Elizabeth a great tension, but when she found married Lydia, she realizes that Darcy played the instrumental role in this marriage just to save the reputation and marriageability of the other four Bennet daughters. Finally, after all the hustle and the bustle, Darcy once again proposes Eliza, which she accepts happily. So friends, we have seen all this and we have seen the plot of the novel, and now we are acquainted with the Bennet family, Bingley family and Fitzwilliam family to some extent. Let us now discuss the novel in its socio-political background. Friends, you must have noticed one thing, that for all the Bingley sisters, marriage is very crucial thing in their life. In fact, how we can forget that famous quote with which the novel begins? It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This quote sets the primary agenda of Bennet family and mainly Mrs. Bennet, who is very much worried about the marriage of her 5 daughters. We might be surprised, friends, why marriage is so important for specifically the girls during this age. The answer lies in the social background of early 19th century Britain. During Austen's time, the daughters of the middle and upper class could be sent to school. Their education there consisted more of becoming accomplished than it did of expanding their academic knowledge. Women in early 19th century, friends, were not allowed, specifically I am talking about Britain, they were not allowed in higher education also. So, for an intelligent woman like young Elizabeth, the only option for her education independently is through the reading. Elizabeth indicates as much to Lady Catherine, describing education for her and for her sisters as being unstructured but accessible. And I quote, "Such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means, We were always encouraged to read and had all the masters that were necessary. Those who chose to be idle certainly might. I unquote. It's not just education but also the job opportunities for the women which are very limited. To be a governess or lady's companion, and only two options were available for the women of that time period for economic independence. However, the working condition of these jobs also were unpleasant and degradable. For example, governess might be preyed upon by the men in the family for which they worked, while ladies' companions such as Miss Daybrought's companion in the novel Mrs. Jenkinson might be treated poorly by the employers and given menial tasks to attend to. Any other form of employment a woman could take was considered unacceptable and would most likely irrevocably harm her social standard. And therefore, middle and upper class women had very few avenues open to them for secure future. If unmarried, they would remain dependent upon their relatives living with or receiving a small income for their father, brother, or any other relation who could afford to support them. In Elizabeth's case in the novel, she is dependent upon her father while he is living and she is unmarried. But because of the entail and the fact that she has no brothers, her situation could become quite depressive. When he dies, she and her mother and rest of her sisters would be forced to rely upon the charity of their relatives such as Mr. and Mrs. Phillips, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, and even Mr. Collins after the death of Mr. Bingley. Now we will look at the very beginning of the novel once again. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This entire sentence, which has mocking and sarcastic tone, try to understand it, friends. Truth universally acknowledged is probably less than true. And the real truth is not that single men want wife, right? It is rather the poor young woman need husband for the question of their social and economic security. The novel takes off, in other words, from Mrs. Bennet's notion, right, and the rich man exist for people to marry, specifically for women. Its irony further suggests that the universal acceptance of this idea may take it operatively true that what authorities say and what most people acknowledge matters. So now friends, let us look at the title of the novel itself. It is Pride and Prejudice. So you must have understood by now from the story that title is reference to Darcy's pride, which causes him to reject Elizabeth and her family, and Elizabeth resulting prejudice, which is reinforced by Wickham's false story about Darcy. The entire plot is based on this pride of Darcy and prejudice of Elizabeth. Darcy exhibits all the good and bad qualities of the ideal English aristocrat, snobbish and arrogant. He is also completely honest and sure of himself. Darcy is not acutely a titled nobleman, but he is one of the wealthiest members of the landed gentry, the same legal class that Elizabeth's much poorer family belongs to. While Darcy's sense of social superiority offends people, it also promotes some of his better traits. As Wickham notes in his assessment, I quote Wickham's sentence, his pride never deserts him, but with the rich he is liberal-minded, just sincere, rational, honorable, and perhaps agreeable, allowing for fortune and figure. I unquote. It is only we can see the change in Darcy's attitude when first time Elizabeth rejects him, turning down his marriage proposal, saying that it was ungentlemanly. However, realizing and recognizing his own mistake, Darcy later on clarifies why he was like that way. And he says that I was spoiled by my parents, who, though good themselves, allowed, encouraged, almost taught me to be selfish and overbearing, to think meanly of all the rest of the world. On the other hand, friends, Prejudice of the Elizabeth is also very crucial for the development of the plot. The way we have seen Darcy's pride, Elizabeth's prejudice is also important for the development of the plot as well as her character. And this prejudice was also enhanced when specifically she listened to the idea of or the story said by Wickham. She painfully recognizes the inappropriate behavior of most of her family, and she quickly identifies Mr. Collins as a fool and Lady Catherine as a tyrant. However, this ability to size people up leads Eliza too far at times. She proceeds from reasonable first impressions of Darcy and Wickham to definite and wrong conclusions about their characters. Her confidence in her own discriminant, a combination of both pride and prejudice, is what leads her into her worst errors. Lastly, friends, I would sum up with the quick revision of what we have done in this video. We have looked at the life of the author first, and then we discussed the plot of the novel in great detail, and then we discussed the text in context of the early 19th century socio-political background of Britain. We discussed the suitability of the characters in context of this social background and specifically the women's role during this time period. We have also discussed the relevance of the title in context of how both the characters have these specific characteristics attributed to them and how it leads to the development of the plot. So friends, I hope you have enjoyed this session on Pride and Prejudice novel, and I will see you in the next session. Till then, goodbye and stay safe. Thank you so much.